Hi, I'm Joe Bevilacqua, and this is an excerpt from the book Chickens Are Not Pets. Chapter 11, Trick or Treat. My friend Billy and I approached Halloween the same way the conquistadors approached the New World, mercilessly. Only we were a lot shorter, fatter, and more pressed for time. Halloween lasts 24 hours, but how many people are willing to hand out milk duds to trick-or-treaters before breakfast? At the other end of the day, does anyone get out of bed to answer that ringing doorbell? We weren't quite sure, and on Halloween 1966, we were determined to find out. Since school started in September, Halloween was nearly all Billy and I thought about and talked about. We knew that as wonderfully productive as previous Halloweens had been, they really were just training for this glorious day of adventure and plunder in the form of vast quantities of free candy. Nothing would stand in our way. We had chosen our costumes with care. While other kids dressed up cleverly in huge cardboard boxes fashioned to resemble military tanks or major appliances, we knew it would be difficult to cover miles of suburban blacktop and climb hundreds, if not thousands, of front steps if we let anything other than efficiency dictate our outfits. So we were hobos, or bums, or whatever you wanted to call someone in an oversized old suit coat with black smudges on his face. Perhaps greed personified would be fitting. Our mission? Sweep up and down each block in a 2-square-mile area around our homes. With the average house on a 50-foot wide lot and 2 sides to each street, there were nearly 200 houses per linear mile. We'd work one side of the street at a time, ringing bells and giving each homeowner a full 15 seconds to respond before ringing again and knocking hard. When the door swung open, we'd chant in unison, "Trick or treat," with about the same enthusiasm that clerks use to summon the next in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Most people who answered the door were as perfunctory in their handouts as we were in soliciting them. A bowl of miniature Milky Ways or 3 Musketeers might be inside on a table by the door, and the trick-or-treatee, usually a woman, would grab 2 or 3 of each and drop them into our sacks. Some disguised their offerings in tiny orange and black paper bags on which were printed Happy Halloween or Trick or Treat. Inside could be anything, though typically there was an assortment of stuff, such as a few Hershey Kisses, good, a bit of honey, great, loose candy corn, okay, or a handful of home-popped popcorn, ugh. The only thing worse was money, some pennies or a nickel. Not that we didn't have plenty of good uses for lucre. Hello, Bazooka Joe! But Halloween Jack wasn't ours to keep. It had to go to UNICEF. The United Nations Children's Fund had a death grip on any money kids collected on this day, with the organization not only taking the 1965 Nobel Peace Prize, but by 1966 had President Johnson hailing Trick or Treat for UNICEF as an antidote to vandalism and juvenile delinquency. It was common knowledge that even a little bit of money went a long way in helping needy kids overseas. That year, 1 cent buys 6 glasses of milk was almost as well known as the lyrics to the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. Even Superman got into the act, with a Man of Steel pointing out that 1 penny buys a tuberculosis vaccine for a kid in South America and 5 vitamin capsules for boys and girls in Africa. It didn't help that at school we were given little orange boxes to collect the coins, and some goody-goody kids forsook candy altogether and presented the UNICEF box at every door that opened. We kept our orange boxes safely at home. Even when we hated the treats or the homeowner asked, "Don't you have enough candy already?" We didn't trick. We never tricked. We just moved on to the next door. The answer to the question of whether we had enough candy was, of course, no. While others used paper bags to collect their booty, Billy and I used pillowcases, strong, light, and voluminous by candy hauling standards. In fact, we planned to have emptied and refilled our sacks several times before Halloween was over. But before we could put our plans into action, we first had to get church out of the way. This year, Halloween fell on Sunday, though 6 a.m. Mass would have us back home and suiting up by 7:20. The evening before, Billy and I synchronized our clocks and went to bed early. He lived just up the street, and we agreed to meet at my house at 5:45. Each of us arose in the pre-dawn darkness, ran a toothbrush through our mouths, and a comb over what little hair our parents let us have in these days, when the Beatles were busy corrupting the follicles of America's youth. We slipped into our school clothes that doubled as Sunday clothes, and escaped our homes before anyone else was up. Right on schedule, we met up and walked as fast as we could the nearly 1 mile to St. Anthony of Padua, Roman Catholic Church. Although this was one of the most exciting days on the calendar, with a costumed caloric quest lying ahead in a pre-adolescent Shangri-La, the streets of East Northport were silent. Not a car on Larkfield Road. Not a car in the church parking lot. At this time, East Northport was growing so fast with young families moving from the boroughs of New York City that the tiny old timber church that had served the parish since the 1930s was used only for weddings and funeral masses. A big drive was underway to raise enough money to tear down the little church and build a big brick structure that could accommodate more than 1,000 at a time. But construction would not begin, and Mass would be held in the school auditorium until enough families had, as the church bulletin put it, opened their hearts and pledged a monthly contribution for the new church. Though my parents often gave my sister and me as much as 35 cents each week to put in the collection plate, we weren't among the families that pledged. Once, 2 men in ties who represented the fundraising committee stopped by and sat in the living room with my parents. They spoke in soft tones, nodded their heads in an understanding way, and tried to get my father to take a little pledge book that looked like a packet of raffle tickets. My parents pleaded poverty. They also pointed out that my mother was a Methodist, and that pretty much ended the conversation. Since it was a fairly commonly held belief among good Catholics at the time that Protestants were just a half step from Jews. Billy's parents had pledged. By the standards of our neighborhood, they were well off. His father, a short, stout fellow in muddy construction boots, was a home builder. He looked exactly like Billy, only in an adult version. I looked a lot like Billy, too. Short, fat, dark hair, 2 years older. 12 to Billy's 10. People often thought we were brothers, but we were just overfed. On Halloween 1966, just as the sun was pushing its forehead over the horizon, Billy and I entered St. Anthony's auditorium. Only a few lights were on. No candles were burning. St. Anthony and the Virgin were standing serenely on one side of the altar, while Jesus hung in life-size agony on the wall behind. But no one else. Every folding chair was empty. Not even an usher was standing by with a collection basket in hand. I turned around and looked at the clock on the rear wall. 5:02. "Was last night daylight savings time?" I asked. "Turn the clocks back!" Billy cried in horror. We returned home. I got back into the house without any problems, but Billy encountered his parents. He called to say they were angry about our early morning escape, and they refused to let him leave the house for Mass, let alone for trick-or-treating, until after 9 a.m. That meant we wouldn't be able to ring our first doorbell until nearly 11 a.m. It was a serious time-wasting setback that we each addressed by fortifying ourselves with a few bowls of cereal and watching the clock until we could start Halloween all over again. Even with this late start, some neighbors thought we were jumping the trick-or-treating gun by demanding handouts before late afternoon. Clearly, they just didn't understand how to celebrate this holiday as well as we did. And we just kept going. By well past dark, when people had stopped answering the door, we took stock of our haul. Mission accomplished. Huge piles, sorted by type, filled our dining room table. Bags on the floor held trick-or-treat chaff, such as apples and old lady hard candy. There was even a little pile of coins for UNICEF. Billy and I split the candy, and over the next few days ate all of the best stuff. The rest sat in big bowls in our kitchens, pretty much untouched for weeks. Around Thanksgiving, the candy started to look old and dusty, and our parents threw it away.